The strongest minds don't look the way you'd expect. When most people think about mental strength, they picture someone who never cries, never doubts themselves, never shows any vulnerability at all. Someone who seems almost immune to life's difficulties. But here's the thing, that image is almost entirely wrong. The people who are genuinely, deeply, mentally strong, they're often the ones you'd least expect. They don't walk into a room radiating toughness. They don't constantly remind you how much they've been through. In fact, some of the most mentally resilient people you'll ever meet are quiet, reflective, and surprisingly comfortable with their own imperfections. And that's exactly what makes them so fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Today, we're going to explore 10 hidden signs that reveal extreme mental strength. Signs that don't look like strength from the outside. But when you understand the psychology behind them, you realize they represent some of the most sophisticated emotional and cognitive functioning a human being can develop. The first sign is that they are comfortable sitting with uncertainty. Think about how most people respond to not knowing something. There's an immediate pull toward resolution, checking the phone, asking for reassurance, making a decision just to end the discomfort of not having an answer. Psychologists call this the need for cognitive closure, and research shows that most people have a fairly high tolerance threshold for uncertainty before anxiety kicks in. Mentally strong people are different. They've developed what psychologists describe as tolerance of ambiguity, the ability to hold an unanswered question without it destabilizing them emotionally. They can say, "I don't know yet," and genuinely mean it without triggering a spiral. That's not passivity. That's a deeply trained relationship with the unknown. The second sign is that they feel their emotions fully and then move through them. Here's something interesting that most people misunderstand about emotional strength. It's not about suppressing feelings. The brain doesn't actually work that way. When you push an emotion down, the limbic system, the brain's emotional processing center, doesn't switch off. It just goes underground, often showing up later as anxiety, irritability, or physical tension. Mentally strong people do something different. They allow themselves to fully experience an emotion, observe it almost like a curious witness, and then consciously redirect their attention. This process, known in psychology as emotional regulation, involves the prefrontal cortex actively working alongside the amygdala rather than fighting against it. The result? Feelings pass more quickly, not because they were avoided, but because they were actually processed. The third sign is that they set boundaries without guilt. This one is quieter than it sounds. Mentally strong people don't make a performance out of saying no. They don't over-explain or apologize excessively. They simply communicate what they can and cannot do. And they don't spend days afterward wondering if they disappointed someone. Research in attachment theory suggests that people who grew up with secure emotional foundations tend to have an easier time with this. But even those who didn't can absolutely develop it over time. The psychological mechanism here involves a stable sense of identity, a consistent internal answer to the question, who am I and what do I value? When that foundation is solid, external disapproval loses much of its power. The fourth sign is that they don't seek validation for every decision they make. Consider this for a moment. How many times do you share a decision not because you need advice, but because you need someone to tell you it's okay? That impulse is deeply human. The brain is a social organ. It evolved in communities where belonging meant survival and disapproval felt genuinely dangerous. But mentally strong people have largely internalized their own value system. They still seek feedback when it's genuinely useful, but they've separated the need for information from the need for approval. That distinction, subtle as it sounds, represents a significant shift in psychological self-reliance. The fifth sign is that they take full responsibility without self-destruction. Here's a paradox worth sitting with. Some people never take responsibility for anything, always finding an external explanation, always positioning themselves as the victim of circumstances. But on the other end of the spectrum, some people take on so much responsibility that every mistake becomes evidence of their fundamental inadequacy. Mentally strong people live in neither extreme. When they make an error, they acknowledge it clearly, understand what happened, make a correction where possible, and then genuinely move forward. Psychologists refer to this as an internal locus of control, paired with self-compassion, a combination that research consistently links to resilience, better performance, and long-term psychological well-being. Now, here's something worth pausing on for a moment. As you go through these signs, you might notice that many of them involve a kind of quiet internal work, not loud declarations of strength, but subtle shifts in how a person relates to themselves and to the world around them. That's not accidental. Real mental strength almost always lives on the inside, invisible to everyone except the person doing the work. The sixth sign is that they can be genuinely happy for other people's success. This might seem simple, but psychologically it's anything but. The brain has a natural comparison mechanism. Researchers call it social comparison theory, where we unconsciously measure our own progress against the people around us. When someone close to us achieves something we also want, it can quietly trigger a low-level threat response in the brain. Mentally strong people have done enough internal work that their self-worth is not primarily built on being ahead of others. Their identity is rooted in their own values and personal growth trajectory, which means another person's success doesn't have to register as their failure. That internal shift is genuinely difficult to develop, and it remains one of the clearest signs of deep psychological security. The seventh sign is that they protect their energy without explaining themselves. They leave situations that consistently drain them. They limit time with people who destabilize their emotional state. They build rhythms and routines that preserve their mental clarity. And here's what's important. They do all of this quietly, without lengthy justifications or dramatic announcements. This behavior reflects a sophisticated understanding of what psychologists call cognitive load and emotional bandwidth. The brain has finite resources for attention, decision-making, and emotional regulation. People who deliberately protect those resources tend to think more clearly, perform better, and maintain more stable moods across time. The eighth sign is that they embrace discomfort as part of growth. Research from behavioral psychology consistently shows that avoiding discomfort feels better in the short term, but creates more psychological fragility over time. The brain genuinely learns through experience. Every time we face something difficult and come through it, the neural pathways associated with coping and resilience grow measurably stronger. Mentally strong people have internalized this truth, often through lived experience rather than theory. They don't seek suffering, but they don't run from difficulty either. They've developed what psychologist Angela Duckworth famously studied as grit, the ability to persist through challenge because the long-term direction matters more than short-term comfort. The ninth sign is that they know when to ask for help. Here is perhaps the most counterintuitive sign of all. Many people associate mental strength with complete self-sufficiency, never needing anyone, handling everything entirely alone. But genuine psychological resilience includes knowing the limits of what you can process by yourself and having enough security to reach out without it feeling like a personal defeat. Asking for help when it comes from a grounded place rather than a helpless one is actually a sign of clear and honest self-awareness. It means you understand your own needs, you trust others appropriately, and you're not so attached to an image of invulnerability that it gets in the way of actually taking care of yourself. And the 10th sign is that they return to themselves after being knocked down. Not immediately, not without pain, but they return. There's a concept in psychology called psychological recovery, the ability of the nervous system to return to a regulated, stable baseline after significant stress or loss. This capacity isn't something people are simply born with. It's built through experience, honest self-reflection, and the slow accumulation of evidence that they have survived hard things before. Mentally strong people carry a deep, quiet confidence. Not that nothing will ever go wrong, but that when it does, they will find their way back. That's not naive optimism. It's something far more grounded, something genuinely earned through experience. And maybe that's the most important psychological insight to carry away.